because I have to believe James Thurber thinks that's very, very funny to be honored with a bobblehead in this modern times. He would find that terribly hilarious. But anyway, the fact is that this is the Fisher plot. And Mary, his mother, was a Fisher. William Fisher was a very, very important man in Columbus in the 1900s. He was very, very well known, and I tell Columbus folks, it would be like the Lazarus family of the 50s. Everybody knew the Fishers, everybody shopped there. He was a greengrocer, very wealthy, and apparently quite a character himself. So it's a Fisher plot, and what in fact we have here are Fisher children, and most of these graves are descendants of the Fishers. But Mary was a Fisher, and she had the good fortune to marry Charles Thurber, and that is mom and dad to James. So in fact there are only 4 Thurbers in this plot. James Thurber, the middle boy, and his younger brother Robert. He had the older brother William married late in life and is buried with his wife in, I think, Florida, somewhere south. So in fact, there are only 4 Fishers here, and that's why we're at this particular plot. James Thurber, of course, the great satirist, great writer, known especially for his magazines, the magazine The New Yorker, in which he was published. A lot of his short stories started there, and then they later, as he got popular, collected them into books, and collections and collections and collections of books that carry Thurber's name on it. He was also known for his cartoons. You see the dog there, and this is another great example of a little cartooning. The Thurber dogs became very, very well known. And I love to tell this story at the New Yorker in the 20s and 30s, when he was sending in these cartoons and they started publishing them in the magazine. A real cartoonist went to Ross. Ross is the editor of the New Yorker. And the guy said to Ross, "What is this? I give you these great cartoons and here you are publishing this 5th grade artist Thurber." And Ross interrupted him and said, "No, 3rd grade." So Ross and Thurber had quite a working relationship, but it certainly made his name as a writer. He did not write any novels. He wrote a few plays. In fact, one play, if I forget to say it, I'll say it now, called The Thurber Carnival, is being put on in Clintonville this month. So if you're into Thurber, The Thurber Carnival, which he wrote when he was at Ohio State, is being staged this month at the Civic Theater. But anyway, mostly he wrote some children's books. Mostly it's the short pieces for which Thurber is known. And before I launch into telling you about some of the great Thurber writings, I really have to go back and mention Mame, his mother. Now I had the dog looking askance at poor Mame, and I laugh and say there's a reason for that. But I'll tell you the reason, even though the dog's sleeping. Mame was a character. There's no question about it. Mother, James' mother. Her name was Mary. They called her Mame. One time, her husband Charles, a politician, was sitting around with a bunch of Republicans, and I think all they do is sit around and talk about serious things, right? Well, that's what they were doing, and Mame, in a negligee, which was a little scant at the time anyway, came halfway down the stairs, threw herself over the balustrade, and says, "At last they've let me out of the attic." So Charles had quite a bit to put up with, and this is the mother who reared James. Okay, Thurber the writer, let me talk to you a little bit about his stories. He wrote plays. The Thurber Carnival is one that's being performed right here in Columbus and Clintonville this month, if you're really into Thurber, called the Thurber Carnival. The book that I'm holding, however, is not a play. It's a collection that I recommend because it's one of the best collections of his writing. And it also includes, and it has cartoons, some of his classically great cartoons in here, as well as a lot of his great stories. Now, one collection of stories that I like to mention to people is My Life in Hard Times. And the reason I mention that particular collection is he wrote many of those when he was living here in Columbus. And they are some great stories about his growing up in Columbus. Now, you know, Kentucky is always trying to claim Lincoln because he was born there, and Illinois tries to claim him because he was a representative. Well, Thurber was Columbus, and nobody argues that. He lived in 14 different houses in about a 3-mile radius. And that seems odd in a way, but his dad was a politician. So he was in office, he was out of office. He had a good job, he had a lousy job. At one point they had to move in with Daddy Fisher even. So Thurber lived, I think 7 of the houses still stand, but of course only one has been renovated that we call Thurber House. I'll talk about that in a bit. But Thurber is definitely a Columbus boy. And My Life in Hard Times, he writes about his adventures when he lived in that house. And the one quote that comes from that book is often quoted of Thurber and Columbus, when he says, "Columbus is a town in which almost anything can happen, and in which most of it has." And that is attributed to him. It's right in that book, that quote, pretty close to the way he wrote it. James also writes of, in that My Life in Hard Times, the flood of 1913, which is a real flood that happened here in Columbus. And it was a disaster for those, of course, who lived near the river. But Jamie, who lived 3 miles away up there on Jefferson Avenue, writes a humorous account of how people were running down Broad Street, screaming, yelling, climbing trees, climbing statues. "The dam broke, we're going to drown. Go east, young man, go east." And he writes a hilarious account of the kind of panic that set in.